Welcome to the bar. You are just in time. Today's episode started out as a debate where we were going to try and figure out who was right and who was wrong, but by the end, it became something so much more. So as always, here's the disclaimer. Let's get into it. So to start this off, we're going to go ahead and give everyone a quick introduction, all right? It's just going to be a little bit of time, a little schmeckle, if you will, of time to kind of make their point before we get into the questions and the overall debate. Robbie, you said that you had one pretty well prepared. Would you like to go first?
Of course. Let me get this script out. On May 30th, 1431, Joan d'Arc was killed. Was she killed for leading a rebellion against England and leading armies against them? No. Was she killed for claiming that she was a messenger of God? No. She was killed for wearing, as paraphrased, boyish clothes and wearing her hair short. She was a tomboy and she was killed for it. But her legacy lives on in the hottest women that exist today, and the hottest people that exist today, the tomboy. The tomboy is a long and storied legacy. Joan d'Arc, Cleopatra, fucking maybe Mary Shelley. I don't know. She seemed more just like Manic Pixie Dream Girl, but doesn't matter. Point is, it's a long and storied history, and that prevails to this day. Now, clearly, they are superior because they are the final product of feminism. Once, women could only wear skirts and their hair covered or long. Now, women have the option to ascend and wear their hair short and wear pants. That's so much better.
That is an interesting point right there. Gothbar, do you have anything that you want to say either in response or make an opening argument yourself?
I think I have a lot to say in that regard. Like, first I have to start off by saying, like, I do like tomboys. They're pretty good. I think they're actually one of the best, but they're not as good as femboys. I think the reason you
agreed. Respect to femboys, but they're worse than tomboys.
I'll remind you that this part of the debate is not open for interruption.
Oh, true. My bad.
The tomboys are amazing, but femboys are superior. I think the reasons you stated were absolutely true. But I think what the problem is that these reasons you stated about them breaking down barriers, well, the barriers have already been broken. Nobody's upset at women for like wearing hoodies and pants now. That's totally fine. Whereas the real innovation is all happening on the femboy side. That's where the glass ceilings are being broken, and that's where society is changing. Femboys are the ones that are pushing society and societal norms and gender norms forward. Nobody cares if a girl wears a pants, but if a boy wears a skirt, everyone loses their fucking minds. Because femboys are the ones pushing society forward now, and they're the ones breaking down barriers. And they can break down your backdoor barrier.
Interesting points all around. Well, I think that those two introductions really did a good job of setting up the stage. Obviously, we've acknowledged that both of you like both sides of this coin. All right, there's not really a wrong answer, but there's one that we're gonna try and see if we can prove to be just a little bit over the other. So now I'm gonna kind of open it up more to open debate. All right, we've set our responses there. Both of them are kind of pushing things forward, but now we're gonna talk about more of the experience between them. And for this, I'm gonna start off with a question. So there is this clip from a hit show named Family Guy from a little while ago, and it kind of shows how things were back in the 80s. You know, Peter's at a party with a bunch of high schoolers, you know, as he does, and at that party he was with the hot cheerleader girl named Stacy. All right, now Stacy she was trad, she was blonde, she was gorgeous overall.
Ooh.
But then comes along Jennifer, and Jennifer's a little bit different. She works as a mechanic, and when asked if Peter finds Jennifer attractive, Peter goes ahead and says, "What? No, she's basically a guy. We've been best friends our whole life." But then she shows up in a dress, and Peter goes, "Sorry, Stacy, but according to 80s law, your long-standing hotness is overruled by a feminized tomboy." Now, notice the wording there. Notice the wording there, Robbie. A feminized
tomboy?
Yes.
You're gross. I'm sorry. No.
But that's what Peter wanted.
I'm sorry, Peter.
How does that fall into this? And in the 80s,
could that go the other way?
I think
I think we've fallen into the dark side of the tomboy femboy dynamic, which is the let me find this woman who's all cool and alternative and like capture her and put her in a fucking cage and make her fucking like normie.
I agree. It's
No,
problematic. It's going back in
fuck
time.
that. Boo. Fuck that.
It's
Fuck
inverting
that.
whatever makes both of them hot. It'd be like making
Exactly.
a femboy more masculine. That's a
You're-
problem no matter what you believe.
But is there a way that could work?
You're femboys. You're tomboy. You're tomboys. Like what the fuck is this?
Yes,
No.
but according to Peter, it works. Now I'm trying to say, is there a situation where it could work the other way around, the same way that it did there? You know, could Peter have seen a femboy, said that he didn't find the femboy attractive, but then the femboy shows up in like fucking overalls or some shit? I don't know. I guess that's Mexican clothes. Fucking overalls.
No.
And he's
Yeah.
like, oh shit, sorry.
Or of femboys.
The
I'm
allure
sorry?
of femboys is they wear skirts.
Exactly. But is that also the allure of tomboys? Or is there something a little bit deeper going on under the hood?
I'm sorry. Those who wish to untomboy their tomboys, I truly have no respect for. I do not. You are not one
But
of
that
us.
is a type. That is a type.
That is
He reveals a pretty similarity between tomboys and femboys, where both are rejecting the societal norms of both of them, and when you try and force them to go back, that's where we run into problems, and that's
an angel loses his wings.
Yes, I agree
you're-
completely there.
You're like it's like the guys who want to unalt their alt girl, right? Like
Yes,
like
that is a great example, and that's kind of where this is falling into. That's kind of where this whole thing is going.
and also thematically, these stories are a problem, right? Like for example, The Breakfast Club, right?
Great
Great
example.
Great example. There's that one. What is it? The one like weird girl with the short, who's essentially kind of like in the tomboy area, more alt girl, but you know, like kind
It
of
was
like
the
a Mary
80s.
Shelley type.
They couldn't go that far. They couldn't
It
go
was
all
the
the way.
80s. They could, but in the end, they make her all like traditional feminine, and I was just like, "What are you doing?" Thematically, this is so problematic. Thematically, you're saying that that your weirdness is only okay insofar, and your breaking of traditions only okay insofar as that you eventually return to those traditions. That they are only okay as a phase, and not as a true expression of your personality. And I think that's truly objectionable.
I think that definitely points to an area of agreement between us. However, what I would say is femboys push it farther is because people are okay with tomboys now, but no one's really trying to fix tomboys as much as they used to, whereas everyone's trying to fix femboys. Everyone's always trying to take femboys back to what they were and back to societal norms, which is why femboys are pushing the boundaries more than tomboys are.
I do agree
I'd
with
argue that-
Gothbard there.
But I would argue that although femboys are currently pushing the lines forward, tomboys were the first to push the lines forward, and they're the ones who defend the line. It's because of tomboys that femboys are able to advance forward. It's because of the contributions of tomboys that we see the increasing progression of femboys and the allowance of it. Because if women can dress more mask, then why should men not be allowed to dress more femme? But you knock out that foundation of women being able to dress more mask, and it all falls away.
I totally agree that the contribution contribution of tomboys is significant. However, they're still the old way. They're still like from the 80s or whatever. Like that's still like what your parents liked. Like femboys are the new thing. They're the new latest progression of pushing societal and gender norms. Tomboys are just like the old thing that people really don't care about anymore. It's femboys are in now. These femboys are the new. Femboys are pushing it farther than tomboys ever would and ever could.
Really now. Hold on.
Yeah,
wait,
literally,
give
they're
me a second
pushing
to
it in
think.
farther.
Well, in the meantime, while he's thinking, I've got a question for Gothbard here. So Gothbard, a lot of times when talking about femboys, you know, one of the old terms was the term trap. How do you think that falls in, and should that be a term that is allowed?
I mean, there are a lot of different terms that are kind of like overlapping. Like, and there's always the kind of the argument of like, where does femboy begin and like trans women start? I think that there's kind of like a whole spectrum of like you kind of start with traps, people kind of just pretending to be or whatever, but then you kind of transition to femboys, and then maybe to trans women, maybe not. But I feel like traps are kind of like they're the farthest normal of all of the whole spectrum. It's like an acceptable place to be, and I feel like it's a fun start. But some people don't really go farther than traps. Other people go all the way to a femboy, maybe even trans women. Not the trans women are exactly on that spectrum, but they're still in that same kind of area in conversation. Traps are cool.
Listen, sometimes you got listen. Sometimes you gotta wear the costume before they become the clothes. You get trapped 1 year, and you come back 5 years later, you've got a beautiful woman on your hands. You never
Yes.
know.
It's what we in business
And then you
school
look at
call.
their
It's what we in business school call an investment. That's a
absolutely.
joke. That's a joke.
See, okay, this brings up an interesting aspect though, which is that femboys are much more of a trans pipeline than I think tomboys are. Tomboys, I think, are a lesbian pipeline.
Or a trans man.
Yeah, now that I think about it, yes, many tomboys do go to trans mass. I believe that.
Well, it's a pipeline is not necessarily saying that it forces them down one path. I want to make that clear. When we say that term, we're not saying like it causes them to do that. Obviously, that's much more internal than anything like saying, oh, just because you do this, you're going that
Yeah.
way. But I would say that it could be a good way, a good starting point for people that are not educated enough to be able to move that way on their own. You know, for a lot of people, discovering that these exist are their first ways and what allows them to start going on this self-discovery journey and really figure out what
Yes,
they
sir.
want to
Crack
be.
that egg.
Hey,
Crack
guys,
that egg. Let's
that's what we do
go.
here.
I think
Um,
what you said was absolutely right. Like it's more easy to experiment as being a femboy than it is as a trans woman, and it's more easy to
Yeah.
experiment as like a tomboy than it is as a trans man. It's like kind of baby step for some people, not for everyone, but it's a very easy entrance to more discovering your truth.
Yeah, or like towards like becoming like non-binary or like any other or like gender fluid or like any other kind of gender orientation.
Well, I think that's something that can be good here right now is that we're gonna bring up some characters into this. I think that this will be a really fun way to go about it. So to start off, I'm gonna give you guys each a second to say your favorite character from any kind of show that falls into whatever category you're arguing for. Whoever's ready with one, just go ahead and shout it out.
This.
I won.
All right, Gothbard, you can go ahead and get
What's
started
somebody
off
thinking?
here.
My favorite femboy, with the first femboy I ever saw, was Hideyoshi from Baka and Test. I love him so much. He's such a silly guy.
Now, can you give us a little
Okay,
summary
okay.
of why that's such a great character for those who might not know who it is?
It's a Baka and Test is an anime that's it's a slice of life school anime, which is really fun. But one of my personal most favorite part of it is Hideyoshi, who's the femboy. He's constantly trying to convince everyone who's still masculine and all that, but everyone thinks he looks like a girl. And all the girls are jealous, and all the boys are jealous, and the boys are constantly trying to take pictures of him because he's so cute.
So, Gothbard, I actually have a question for you, moving
What?
off of what we've been talking about right now. Do you know the anime Assassination Classroom? Are you aware of that show?
A little bit.
That's Nagisa.
So there is a character in that show who I don't remember the name of, but I'll go ahead and flash a picture of them on screen right now. And this character is would not fall into the category of a femboy. All right, and I think that's very important to note here.
Nagisa.
But people
Yes,
say
sir.
that he is
The
for the
goat.
reason that he presents that way. Now, I just ask you, is that something that is problematic, or is something that can like degrade like the actual femboy like archetype through the labeling in that way, you know? Because he never like says it, but everyone says it about him, but he never really like argues because he's a cartoon character that can't say words other than the ones in the script.
I would say that's not that. I would say that's not at all like wrong or anything. I think a lot of femboys actually are like wouldn't consider themselves femboys or wouldn't even be called wouldn't like. I feel like femboy is almost a label that you don't choose. It's almost thrust upon you by a society and by other people. Like there are a lot of femboys. I think in most media they don't call themselves femboys. It's just kind of assigned to them. I think it's totally fine. I think there's some labels that are like trans women that are a lot more defined, a lot more concrete and mean a lot. But femboys are kind of just for fun, and like a lot of characters that aren't femboys we call femboys, or like it's like I think femboys are all just kind of fun. There's certainly like boundaries. People who I would say would absolutely not are femboys, but like they look pretty feminine and are comfortable in their femininity. I would say I'm totally fine with them being a femboy.
Interesting. Robbie, do you have anything to add to that?
To the femboy, to Nagisa specifically, I think Nagisa as a character specifically is interesting because of his specific dynamics with how his femboyness reflects on concepts of like domestic abuse and like gender insecurity and such. However, I largely agree with Gothbard's points, and I don't think that the larger ramifications of Nagisa's plotline are kind of on subject for this specific discussion. Not that we can't get into them.
Nice. Well, Robbie, do you have a character prepared now that you would like to discuss on your side to really offer like support, if you will?
So, I mean, alas, we do run into the issue, unfortunately, with tomboys. Of oftentimes, tomboys are relegated to side characters. Minor side characters you see on the side, maybe they play a role in an arc or two, but oftentimes they're cast aside and forgotten, right? Classic examples could be Sinon from SAO. There could be that one short red-haired girl from 86. We could go on and on. However, one tomboy who truly has taken the focus. Actually, I'll name two. The first, there's two tomboys that I have in mind that truly take the focus of their respective animes. Obviously, to start, we have Mikasa or Misaka from Attack on Titan, who, of course, who is the prototypical tomboy. She is capable. She progressively gets more masculine as the show goes on, though I wouldn't regard her early depictions as tomboy as her later, more adult season 4 and 5 form. That being said, she is, of course, the classic of the tomboys. So, when it comes to tomboys who are notable, we run into a particular issue, which is oftentimes tomboys are either relegated to side characters or they're not very tomboy at all. For example, one of the classic examples of a tomboy people bring up is Winry from Fullmetal Alchemist, who I'll admit is an incredible character. But the only thing tomboy about her is that she has a job that's typically held by men, and she has this somewhat brash personality. There's nothing else particularly masculine about her. She's still very feminine. The same goes for characters like Misaka, have a somewhat better claim to the term tomboy, as they truly are somewhat boyish. That being said, I would still argue that Mikasa is still more feminine than she is at all masculine. Same thing with Allison from SAO. However, I do believe there are a few good examples of tomboys who truly are tomboys. The main character of Kill la Kill, Ryoko?
I think so.
Yeah, Ryoko from Kill la Kill is, of course, a prime example. Okay, but of course, I think my submission for the number one tomboy that I think I've seen in all of anime has to be Swindler from Akudama Drive. I mean, she almost comes off as non-binary coded, given like how androgynous her presentation is. And not only that, but she has one of the most interesting plot lines I think I've ever seen an anime protagonist. One of the most interesting setups that I've ever seen an anime protagonist ever be set into. If anyone hasn't watched Akudama Drive, it's a little racist, but outside of that, it's an incredible anime. Highly, highly recommend if you want some of that cyberpunk goodness. Yeah, some good example of tomboys. Misaka from Attack on Titan, Swindler from Akudama Drive, or I feel like I should have a third one, but I don't have a third one off rip. Or Ryoko from Kill la Kill. Anyways, Gaspar, you were going to continue?
Yeah. So I think that brings up an interesting point. That's something I've been thinking about as you like list these. Is that Femboy has a much less defined term, and it's a lot more kind of vague, and it's almost like thrust upon people. Because I feel like Femboy
Yeah,
is a
agreed.
much more defined term. Like, so I almost feel like
Yeah, femboys are very specific.
like
That
tomboys
is
almost
true.
doesn't mean too much anymore, because like it's just kind of like a masculine woman, and like women are so free to be masculine these days, whereas femboys are a lot less, like, I guess a lot weirder to see a more feminine man. So I feel like that kind of brings to a point where like it's totally fine to be a tomboy, to the extent that like tomboy doesn't mean anything. It's kind of hard to keep track of who's a tomboy, who's not. Whereas femboy is a lot more defined, a lot more concentrating. We can kind of tell what is a femboy and what's not. It's not absolute, of course, but I feel like it's a lot more stronger and a lot more concrete than tomboy, which I feel like just lends to the fact that like it's kind of better because it actually kind of means something.
Yeah, agreed. The tomboys are such a varied term. Also, to add on to the list, Mordred from Fate Apocrypha, as questionable in quality as Fate Apocrypha is, I believe Mordred truly is the epitome of the tomboy appeal. That being said, yeah, I agree. Tomboy is such a widely defined term. It's been broadened so much that even characters that are like I mentioned before, Winry, a very feminine character who really isn't that much of a tomboy, gets slotted in as having like the tomboy status, as do characters like Allison from SAO, or I've seen like any woman that displays any sort of quote unquote like masculine personality traits, like even things like basic confidence, they get slotted in as tomboys, and it dilutes the whole meaning of the word. femboys. You skip femboys. You immediately have your examples. You've got Astolfo. You've got Felix. Right. It's a limited number because we have such a specific idea of what they are.
But is that positive or negative?
I feel like it's
overall.
positive towards femboys because it's a much more concrete term that can be easily defined. Whereas tomboys, like I feel like it's hard to advocate for tomboys because like who even are tomboys? Like there are some, but like it's always kind of an argument because it's such a vague term. But where femboys, like we know exactly who the femboys are. We know exactly.
But dude,
there's always almost total agreement on who is and who isn't femboys.
But then on the other hand, the flexibility of the tomboys allows for it to be an archetype that is inclusive and welcoming, and allows for tomboy archetypes to fit into many more kinds of stories, and for them to appear much more often than femboys ever have. Femboys are so limited in their depictions because of how inflexible they are as characters.
I feel like that's one way to take it, but another way to take it is that like it's so flexible because it doesn't have any significance anymore. Whereas femboys have a lot of significance because they're the ones pushing the conversation on gender forward. Like as I said kind of before, like tomboys are already totally accepted by society. It's femboys who push society forward, pushing the society norms forward. So it makes sense to have femboys have a much more defined and concrete community and also definition because there's the ones who face struggle, like a lot of struggle, whereas tomboys, it's a bit rough sometimes, but like there's no comparison between who struggles more and who's pushing society forward more.
Fair. Though I'd argue this isn't the result of the tomboys or the femboys themselves, but more the result of we just have a mass-leaning society. We assume male as the default. Deviation from that is considered deviant or strange.
I feel like there was a time when being tomboy kind of meant something and was significant, but now I feel like we almost don't even need the term because it's pretty much totally accepted to be for masculine women. Like
Agreed.
It's almost a term and not really of any of large significance. Whereas femboys, like that's a struggling community.
I would argue. Well, I would argue there are like terms for like more extreme forms of tomboys. Like I would argue that like butch is arguably kind of in the same, like the term like butch is arguably in the same vein as like tomboy, right? And or like for example, like Vi from Arcane spend in the first arc, in the first 3 episodes, if you watch the show, spends the show as much more of a tomboy, whereas in the main part of the show, she's much more of a butch lesbian, which again also kind of intersects with the whole intersection of tomboys and femboys and queerness.
I mean, I would definitely not want to state that like the masculine women pipeline doesn't have any sort of struggles at all, but I think it is pretty clear that like feminine men do face more societal struggles than masculine women, and so I feel like just the idea of there being femboys and that kind of community and that kind of whole intersection of feminine men is a much more needed term and a much more like significant term that like I feel like just helps society more that is a term because like protect the dolls, like that is a significant community that needs help.
Exactly. There's very few attacks on trans masks, but there's a lot of attacks on trans femmes. I would agree with that. I would definitely agree with that. I think that there's also some weird puritanical cultural elements to that entire divide as well, with how we regard women and how we still have this concept of like female chastity that, right, arguably very outdated. But regardless, I would argue that I would also argue that I don't think that while the divide between tomboys and femboys in terms of the oppression they face as tomboys and femboys is different, it is worth noting that tomboys still are women and oftentimes do get mistreated in the same ways that women are, and oftentimes even more so, given that they're seen as being non-traditional and don't get as much of the and when they experience sexism is oftentimes far worse since they don't have the shield of like traditional masculine norms around women in the same way.
I would never want to minimize that, and I would even say like a lot of discrimination, or a lot of discrimination directed towards the feminine the masculine women side of things comes a lot from women too, as well as men. Like a lot of my more masculine female friends face a lot of discrimination from women, just saying that, oh, you're not as pretty as us, you need to be more pretty, you need to present yourself for a man or something like that. Like there's a lot of discrimination that goes towards masc presenting women.
Absolutely. And it's also worth noting that feminine men are also heavily ostracized by non-feminine men. Right, obviously, like you can't, like you almost can't escape you almost can't escape, especially with femboys. Like you almost can't escape like either the two responses, either being like essentially like extreme fetishization, or being told to like get in the gym, go like take off that makeup, put on some pants and get in the gym, go to a construction site. You know?
Absolutely. I would almost say that like it's very. I feel like it's pretty clear that the most out, most like most frowned upon, most out there, like most extreme group is often more sexy. And I think it's pretty clear that like femboys are the more extreme and more out there their group compared to tomboys.
Yeah, I think also it's worth noting, very not to get well. I mean, this entire thing is pretty political, but it's also worth noting that like femboys definitely also get a lot of heat due to the current level of vitriol around trans women in modern U.S. politics as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there's a lot of prejudice. The prejudice goes around. The attack on one's attack on all. The reality is that both are pretty heavily discriminated against due to them defying gender norms and societal standards.
I would totally agree with that. As the nation grows, like I feel like more transphobic and more against the trans media and anybody not presenting what they're supposed to present. Like it's a struggle for everybody. I do think like circling back to this, but I feel like it is more of a struggle for trans for female presenting, for more female leaning men than it is for masculine presenting women, and those people on the same sort of pipelines. There's a significant struggle on both sides, but I feel like there is more for more feminine leaning men.
I would argue at the moment, I would agree. I would argue that historically it varies more, right? Obviously, if you go back even 50 years, the situation flips entirely, right? You go back 50 years, feminine men were relatively common, masculine women were almost completely unheard of. Go back another 50 years, and being a masculine woman was something you could die for.
Absolutely. I think it was weird how society kind of changes like that. Although I would say, I wouldn't feel like you're a little bit exaggerating how accepted feminine men were in the past. Like for some, and like but I feel like it was really more only accepted for like more Hollywood types. Like I feel like
True. Okay, agreed.
Not to butt in here too much, but I do think that when you look at like a character like Elton John, I feel like that was very groundbreaking at the time.
Absolutely.
Showing just like how unorthodox it was. Meanwhile, you've got all the examples of the 80s like Tomboys. Now, I'm not saying that it's a bad thing that they're accepted. Obviously, that's not the point. We're just talking about timeline right here. But I do want to make the counter. Obviously, I'm not on either side here. I'm just the moderator. But I do want to make the counter that being more recent development doesn't necessarily mean that it's any less crazy. Like it's any less like pushing us forward as a society.
Yeah, well, I'd like to make a point though that I think that it's not entirely just based on time too. It's also what represents more threat to the current status quo, right? So historically, tomboys have been more persecuted than femboys, since women being generally regarded as universally lower than men. Any challenge to that was seen as a much larger affront. Whereas now that now that feminism's taken largely had its course, obviously there's still ways to go, but with women largely being accepted as like equals in society by most of society, the concept of a woman taking on a more masculine role is assumed to be within the default, and almost even what's expected with the societal changes of the last 100 years or so. Whereas femboys are representing, because even though we've given women equal rights, we still hold masculinity on the pedestal, and whereas before a woman trying to ascend to it was seen as the higher threat, now it's the idea that men could descend from being the masculine ideal to being feminine. There's a lot of fear around it. A lot of the prejudice is rooted in fear, since it implies that masculinity isn't the end goal.
Oh, yeah, that's a super interesting point. I honestly had never thought about it that way. That like just how deeply rooted misogyny is in our culture. That like just saying that maybe masculinity isn't the peak. Maybe embracing your femininity is kind of cool. Maybe even sexy. That like that's totally breaking and questioning the whole way society is set up in this patriarchal sort of way. That like, oh, if you can be more masculine, that's better. And I feel like a lot of people even like celebrate masculine women because they're being more like men, and aren't men the best? Yeah,
Exactly.
They're rejecting that whole core started concept and totally rejecting the whole patriarchal system that our nation's built on.
I would argue that too. You can also see this in the prevalence of AMAB and AFAB non-binaries. For those who don't know, AMAB assigned male at birth, AFAB assigned female at birth, male, female, however you want to call it. But like notably, there's a lot more AFAB non-binaries who are born as women than there are AMAB non-binaries. Like a couple days ago, I saw a meme that was like, I think AMAB non-binaries are so cool. All 12 of us could have like a really cool book club or something, right? And obviously, the joke being that like there's next to no, I don't even think I've met another AMAB non-binary in my lifetime.
I know, so I'm sorry not to disrupt the flow.
Oh yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, no, but like as in like but they're rare. They're uncommon. Gothbud, you were kind of going off for a second. You want to continue?
Oh, I think I was saying that I agreed with you that like in my personal experience, there are more AMAB non-binaries than AFAB. I've got that backwards.
Or AFAB. Yeah, AFAB, more AFAB non-binaries than AMAB. Yeah, absolutely. I was thinking kind of see it in like the perceptions people have towards like queer individuals, especially like gay and lesbian individuals, or the bi men and women, where oftentimes bi and gay men are perceived a lot more negatively culturally than bi women or lesbian women. Obviously, lesbian women have their own set of very unique hatred directed towards them, and that's not to discount that. But like especially with like bi men and bi women, bi men definitely receive the much shorter end of the stick in that regard. It's just seen as a lot more, I guess, for lack of a better term, gross that a man has slept with another man than that a woman has slept with another woman.
And I think there's an interesting dichotomy that I kind of popped into my head is I feel like both bi men and bi women are both like kind of disbelieved. I feel like society often thinks when like there's a bi woman that like they don't believe, like, oh, how could you be into women? You used to have to be into men. If there's a bi man, they automatically would like, oh yeah, you're sorry. See that word? You're gay, not bi.
Yeah.
I feel like society
exactly
disbelieves bi women and bi men for opposite reasons, which I feel like is interesting. I feel like it's almost like part of the general misogyny that like we don't believe women.
Yes,
we don't
and I want to
believe women, but we also don't believe that men. But we also don't believe that men can be only like partially queer.
Yeah.
Well, not even that. I think that if you go on any side of the of the man kind of presenting more feminine in any way, the allegations, like assuming on sexuality that way, happens a lot, and that's a whole nother podcast episode that we'll get to eventually. But it's like, if you're gay and whimsical in life, people will only take the first part of that,
Assume you're gay in bed.
Yes.
Which, to be clear,
but that's not the topic of
awesome
today.
thing.
I think I kind of argued my case pretty well.
I think you argued your case pretty well. I think I fucking failed in arguing my case. I don't really have a great argument. I'm gonna be so real. I think that the argument for Tomboys is, I think that you're largely right that you're largely right that Femboys do largely push the culture forward more, largely just due to the fact that Tomboys have done their job. I would argue that may indicate that Tomboys were more successful, but obviously that's all jokes. They just came first. I also think that. What's up?
No, you go.
I was gonna say, I also think they came at the back of a much more powerful movement than Femboys did. I think that Tomboys largely came with the feminist movement, which obviously was probably because the reality is there's more women than there are queer people. Right? And that the reality is that Tomboys have been able to gain such great acceptance because everyone believes in at least some version of feminism, right? Or most of the country does. I'm not 100% sure about some of the more conservative side, but the majority of the country, at least within the left and moderates, believe in some version of feminism, whereas concepts such as dismantling patriarchy are a lot less common much less in the Overton window.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, do you have any closing statements on your end, Gaspar?
I won. Boys are so sexy.
All right. Well, thank you both for coming on and really discussing this. The debate didn't quite go the way that I was expecting with it, but I'm honestly okay with it because I feel like we got a lot done throughout that process. But thank you all for stopping by the bar today and having listened, and we'll see you all soon for Barside Chats 3.